Welcome to the UK Mentor Podcast. This is your best mentoring friend, Zach. I'm here with Dominick Sanchez from Urban Story. Dominick, say hello today.
How's it going, guys? Glad to be here. Excited.
Man, Dominick, it is good to have you, my man. So, how's it going out there on the West Coast today?
It's going good. It's about 57 degrees here, and by the end of the month, it'll be like 70 degrees here in Fresno. So,
Man,
so
and
yeah.
so I don't know anything about California because I'm in Texas.
Okay.
But so you're up in Fresno. Is that north? Is that south or what?
Yeah. So we're in the Central Valley, so that's straight right in the middle.
Okay.
So that's where we're at. So we're in between. We're 3 hours from San Francisco and 3 hours from Los Angeles, either
Wow.
direction. Yeah. So we're straight in the middle.
So does that mean that you're like a LA Chargers fan, San Francisco 49ers? What's up?
So I'm a Lakers fan. So like I'm a
Crazy.
basketball guy. So in terms of like so people choose. So I'm a Niners fan and a Lakers fan.
Okay. Okay.
So
So,
people kind of choose which way they're gonna go.
man, what do you feel about Luca?
Oh, I feel real good about Luca. I think
Man,
that we've secure. I think it was a great trade for the Lakers.
yeah, it was a fantastic trade for the Lakers. That's why I'm so mad about it. Because
Oh man, are you in Dallas?
oh, dude, I'm an hour and a half from Dallas, but I was born and raised in Dallas, and man, I'm
Yeah.
so upset. I don't
Hey, that's a crazy trade.
makes no sense, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. So man, uh, how how did I find out about you, Dominic? Man, I think I came across your Instagram account, and I was just like, "Who is this cat? Like, he is mentoring. This guy loves kids. This guy loves mentoring." And I think I just tossed over a message and asked if you would be cool with hopping on the pod. So, um,
Yeah.
man, like, why don't you just tell us just a tiny bit about who is Dominic? You married? You got any kids? What do you like to do? Just tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So single, 28 years old. I like to play basketball. I play, sing, drum. I have a studio, rap, do a lot of different activities. Mostly I'm doing mentorship and working and stuff. But when I'm not working, those are the types of acts. Trying to balance it out.
Okay. Okay. Awesome, man. So tell me how you got into mentoring.
So I got into mentoring because at 15 and a half, the Lord I gave my life to Christ. And I had been kicked out of every school in the district here in Fresno, in both districts, Clovis and Fresno. And the Lord basically had a calling on my life, and I heard the voice of God say, "You need to go on the highways and byways and tell people about Jesus." And so from there, I went up on the stage. I said, "Hey, I'm going to give my life to Christ," and there was a 180 turnaround in my life. And from there, I pursued missions work, and I went to Bible college, Medford, Oregon. Was hooked up with a guy named Johnny Schmelzer, who was kind of mentoring me there. And we used to go to apartment complexes, and we would go pick up youth and pile them in our cars and bring them to youth group. And so that's really where the Lord began to speak to me and say, "You're not only just a missionary, you're an urban missionary for the United States." And so that's kind of where my passion for mentorship kind of went into play, as well as my own story of like I had mentors in my life that were seasonal, but in terms of like in the church, there wasn't like a lot of mentorship for me. And so God kind of filled those gaps, but that's part of my passion as well, is being that mentor for individuals who don't have access.
Okay,
So that's how I got into what I do.
man. So, and then why don't you tell us a tiny bit about Urban Story and some of the work that you do there?
Yeah, so my end goal is to see people give their life to Christ and discipled in a way to where they can fulfill their purpose. And so that's been like my whole entire goal, even with Urban Story. We have an office building here in Youth for Christ where I worked for like 6 years. So pretty people know that organization. And Urban Story was just an outflow of doing campus ministry. And so it's kind of a long story. We knew when I was working at Youth for Christ, we had 10% of each campus that were working on giving their life to Christ each year. And so that bled into like neighborhoods. And so we started partnering with youth groups. And what we realized was that there's a need to train the local church to be able to work in neighborhoods where we work, which is a lot of times we're dealing with violent behavior, aggressive behavior, because we work in neighborhoods that are attached with gang activity. And so a lot of the youth that we're working with and the families, there's a lot of behavior problems, and a lot of times the church doesn't know how to handle that. And so Urban Story, first and foremost, was created to tell the story, to tell the urban story, because there's a lot of misconceptions, especially when you take a lot of youth. We were taking 70 to 100 youth every single week to different youth groups, and there's a story that's painted based upon behaviors, and people don't really understand where the causes of how the causes of those behaviors are influencing how they act. And so we want to be able to empower the local church to disciple and mentor more effectively in these communities, and the way we do that is by partnering with people who feel called to this ministry and bringing them into these neighborhoods, doing home visits, doing discipleship in all sorts of like curriculum based ways. So that's
Yeah.
like a lot. Urban Story is a lot, but we wanna change the narrative.
Change the narrative of, okay, okay. Can, you kinda share with us what are some of those misconceptions?
Yeah, so one of the things that people so when we're harvesting new believers, especially youth from neighborhoods experiencing violent crime, when they come into the church, it's very foreign to them. It's a different culture. It's a different, it's there's things that are being said, there's things that are being done that they don't really understand because it doesn't they don't use these languages, they don't have these preset cultural expectations. And so what happens is that there's behavior problems, and what I experienced in the church is that because there's behavior problems, then their salvation is inauthentic. Meaning because they haven't changed their fruit, then the salvation wasn't truly real. And what I've realized is that in Matthew 28, it says, teach them to observe all that I've commanded you in the Great Commission. And that's what Urban Story wants to do. It wants to train the local church to teach the neighborhood how to observe all that Christ has commanded. And so that would be the first misconception, is that behavior um, is what determines whether somebody's saved or not. And what we believe is that faith alone in Jesus Christ is what determines whether somebody's saved. I don't know if that
So
answers the question.
100%, Dominic, you are just preaching to the choir, my man. Okay, so you go out into these, you go out into these neighborhoods, you pick up the kids, you take them to church, and then tell me what, like, some of the mentors there at church, what, in your opinion, does an active mentor kind of need to have to be able to love these kids with the love of Jesus?
Yeah, so first of all, I believe that individuals are called to urban ministry, and especially like the kind of ministry that we're doing that's out in neighborhoods. So that's the first thing. They have to be called to this type of ministry. They have to have a love for God, has to have put something in their heart to go out there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they have to have the training. So part of that training is like that is ongoing with us is training on how to de-escalate conflict, training on how to understand trauma and how it affects a young person's brain and their behaviors, training on ADHD and how that affects them, especially when you're trying to disciple and teach something in like a classroom environment. And then how to do evangelism. So like, and then the basic ones is like being a life-giving member to the body of Christ yourself. And that's like our vision statement, is we want every community member to become a life-giving member of the body of Christ. And what I've realized is a lot of church members are not getting what they need even in their churches. Like they don't know how to preach the gospel. They don't know how to share their testimony. They don't understand like how to read the Bible themselves, how to pray. And they don't understand like how to hear God's voice, what their purpose is. And so in order to become an effective mentor to the greatest capacity, I believe that there's a mix between urban ministry training and the local church receiving discipleship themselves. And so that's what we try to do. We kind of have a twofold process. We train the local church and disciple them, and we also disciple the community. And so, a lot of times in our programs, we have the community and the church be discipled together.
Okay.
And so,
And that, yeah, for sure. So like me, right? Like let's just say that I have no experience with this. Like I am used to hanging out with kids who, they've got two parents, they come from safe homes, they go to good schools, and then all of a sudden I am just exposed to this new type of kid that I don't have lots of experience with, right? Now, like, tell me some of the tools that you guys teach to help this mentor um, in those kinds of circumstances, right? Like, tell me what a mentor, like, tell me what you guys teach your mentor if their kid does experience certain kinds of trauma, or if they do have ADHD, or if they are just like, they really enjoy creating conflict.
Yeah, one of the first things that takes place with us, and this is like the urban story thing, like exposing that story, kind of like where the kids are coming from, is taking the mentor to do a home visit. And that's the big one, and that's where I think urban story is really unique. We are right inside of the neighborhood. We go into people's homes. We pray over their homes. And I think when mentors are able to see where the kids are coming from, then I think that changes how they view the kid when they have behavior problems. So if they're able to come in like and see that, they're lacking in daily food and clothing and the environment of the community, like being in the projects and stuff like that. A lot of people who are in the church that's like a foreign concept to them. Like just in Fresno, at least, and I'm sure for other cities. But like when you go there, I mean, you see gang members on the corner. You see people coming in and out of the house. You see like people doing drugs like in these kids' homes. You see the bad conditions of the houses that they're living in the environment. And I think that kind of exposes that story and that helps to allow the mentor to kind of have some grace in a sense because they're able to actually see it instead of just hearing about it. And so any person that's come out to do home visits with us has stayed as a mentor and has continued to stay involved with this ministry because I think people don't truly understand the realities. And I can go into a lot of the realities uh, of like what's going on out there, at least in the city of Fresno. I'm sure across the United States. Um, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. So the first thing would be home visits and then ongoing training in those categories: ADHD, trauma, de-escalation, urban classroom management, stuff like that.
Yeah, so, like, I know for me, I mean, we have a bunch of sayings, right? Like, there is no such thing as a bad kid. There's
Yeah.
always a reason why. There's always a reason why the kid's acting out. There's always a reason why the kid's fighting. There's always a reason why, and typically it has to do with their hurts. It has to do with their pains. It has to do with their story. And just
Yep.
like, it's really hard to judge someone once you've heard their story. And
Yeah.
in going into their homes and seeing their lives and seeing what they have and seeing what they don't have, that stirs up compassion. That
Mhm.
stirs up a heart that you have to have if you're going to mentor, build relationships for the long haul. Because it is one thing if you don't know a kid's story and they start acting out and they're not paying attention to you and you're trying to teach them stuff and they're just talking, they're just fighting. It's really easy to quit. You're just like, man, forget this. This ain't working. But when you start hearing their story, when you start hearing their testimony, when you start talking about their parents and everything that they've experienced, right? Like there's so many kids out there who've experienced more and they're only like 15, but they've experienced more in 15 years than I have you know, in my 40 years. And I'm just like, well,
Yeah.
no wonder they're mad. No wonder they're angry. No wonder they don't trust because they've experienced all of these things. So,
Yep.
um, man, so like, I would just love to hear just why are you passionate about all of this stuff? Like, um, one of my favorite things that I've heard coming out of your mouth is your pain can turn into your passion. And so I would love to hear kind of your story um, and just kind of how the Lord took what you experienced and turned it into something that's helping a bunch of kids.
Yeah. So, a little bit of my background. I have a unique story. I kind of grew up in a suburban neighborhood, but the environment of my home and the circumstances of my life were I didn't really fit in as a kid. Dad was addicted to methamphetamines my whole life, in and out of prison, in and out of my life. Mom struggled with sickness, cancer. She's better now. Um, ADHD in the classroom, on a load of medications, mental problems, all sorts of stuff. Just and really what that did in my life is it led me to feel rejected. It led me to feel like I was an outcast, and I really didn't have a place where I felt like people truly saw me, saw my story. And so, growing up, I was kicked out of a lot of schools. I like to minister to kids that are the most difficult kids because I was the most difficult kid. Like when I was in school, I had to do half days because I couldn't last within the classroom. So the daycare would come pick me up, and I couldn't do it. I was on 60 milligrams of Ritalin. Um, every year that I was in school, I was suspended. When I went into my teenage years, the cops were being called to my house consistently. There was a lot of chaos and a lot of strife within my home, and so I kind of had this chaotic environment. One a big part of my story is my grandfather passing away on my sixth grade camp from a football-sized tumor in his stomach, and so that was a really because he was my father figure, my mentor. And so from there, I just kind of went off the rails. At 12 years old, I got in an altercation and cut someone with a rusted blade and went into the juvenile justice system. And that's kind of a unique part of my story. I have a lot of unique parts of my story, but my schooling, my sports kind of went to the wayside, and I kind of had no opportunities because I wasn't able to participate in those things, at least here, because I was on probation and I was involved with that. And so, that's why I said at 15 and a half, I was kicked out of every school district, and, but I had individuals that were in my life that came and spoke prophetic words over me, that came, spoke words of purpose and destiny, and they would come, like, when we would go to different cities, they would lay hands on me, and they would tell me, "You're a leader, God has a calling on your life, and you're gonna, break chains of bondage, and you're gonna lead people set people free," and so, at 15 and a half, I realized that the individuals who I was hanging with, my friends, they really weren't for me, and Christ was the one who was for me, and in that moment, I made a decision to follow Jesus, and ever since then, I've wanted to kinda expose that story because I felt like my own story was not really like it w it people misjudged me, whether it be in the church, whether it be in schools, whether it be in my own family, and so because of that ADHD, because of that trauma, I wasn't really able to communicate what was going on in my life, and so that, uh, helps me to be able to understand the kids that we work with and, you know, and be able to create strategies. I feel like the curriculums that we create are based upon my own story. And so just kind of working backwards and reverse engineering what were the things that Dominic did not have in his life and then creating that strategy behind that. And so there's a lot to my story, but basically that's kind of my background and that's my motivation for doing this work.
And so if you could go back and you could meet little Dominic, age 12, what are some things that you would say to him, and what are some things that you would do to him?
If I could go back, I would man, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I would come in and intervene. I would come in and intervene, like, I would come in and become a consistent presence in my life because that was really what I was missing was a consistent presence in my life of an individual who was motivating me, of an individual who was incentivizing me to do well. And so I think that's a big part of Urban Story strategy as well. It's like I wasn't receiving incentive. And that's like a big like so when I would go to school, when I would do well in sports, when I would do well in, reading, math, I wasn't being incentivized because of my behavior problems. And so that led to me saying, you know what? I go home, I go to the neighborhood, I go to school, I go to church, and it doesn't matter what I do. it's not gonna pay off. And I began to learn that even just being a kid with being raised without a father, was that you get your hopes up and you get let down. And so even just in my position is being able to say, show up, right? So like my unique experience is like my father would tell me, hey, I'm going to show up. And then I'd be waiting and waiting and waiting. I wouldn't see him for 2 years. You know what I'm saying? And so when my grandfather passed away, that was kind of like a turning point in my life because that was the only consistent, especially male figure.
Yeah.
And so if I was talking to Dominic and I was his mentor, I would show up. And that's think that kind of sums it up. Is like a lot of mentorship is about consistently showing up. And that's like if you don't have that part, then you're that's really the big part of mentorship and getting the buy-in. Because a lot of like the kids listening has to do with the buy-in that you actually care for them. Because they're used to individuals not caring about them, getting a paycheck to hang out with them, whether it be at school. And so, that's why like things like certificates. Like I remember a moment in my life when I was in school, I would get all these awards, 4.0, 3.0. I would excel in sports, but because of my behavior, I was never rewarded in the assembly. And so all my friends would go up and get their citizenship awards, and I'd be the only one in the whole entire school sitting down, getting nothing. And so again, coming into a kid's life, giving him an In-N-Out burger, going to his house, talking with him, even like giving him a certificate, acknowledging him in front of his peers. These are all things that I would do that I think would make a huge influence, that would make a huge impact in my life.
Yeah. Man, like, I think that's so important, Dominic. I mean, like, I say 90% of mentoring is just showing up. And man,
Yeah.
we whenever you take a look at Jesus and how he treated other people, right? It's like, man, he didn't try to fix anyone. He he didn't come in and point out their bad behavior and say, "Hey, you need to do this, 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 this." Like, I think more than anything, Jesus just showed up and just loved them and accepted them and made them feel like they were a part of something, made them feel like they were loved, make them feel like they were valued, like they were cared for. And man, that is what our kids are so often missing. And that is the great opportunity that we have as mentors is to create that for them. Like there's tons of kids that I've spent time with, and you walk into their house and on the wall in their living room are all these certificates. And I'm sitting here like, these are like, how come this guy has his certificate from second grade,
Yeah.
well, it's because it's one of the only times in his life that someone has pointed out something good and that someone has shined that spotlight on him, right? One of my favorite sayings is mentors get to hold the spotlight, right? It ain't our job to receive the spotlight. No, no, we hold the spotlight and showcase what the Lord is doing in the lives of our mentees. And so, man, what a great example. What a great opportunity we have. If you see something good that your mentee's doing, don't hold that inside, but share that with them because it might be
Yeah.
the first time that someone's ever said that to them. So,
Yeah, it's true.
uh, man, so like, tell me some more. So, you talk a lot about managing conflict, right? And like, we've all got that kid who we've spent time with, who's a part of our program. And man, they're picking fights and they're agitating people. Instead of dismissing that kid, instead of tossing him in the corner or calling his mom or sending him out,
Mhm.
what are some ways that we as mentors can engage him in the conflict? Right.
Yeah, so like there's an elaborate system we have because you don't want the neighborhood to come into the space of learning. So like for us, we have like, 20 to 30 kids who are all, they're all in secondary schools because we're going into these projects and we have kids that are in continuation schools. And so they have like really bad behaviors, and we're having to manage all these behaviors in one space. And that can be tough um to do. Like, you know, I can't even tell you the stories of where it's went wrong. I mean, one story that I had was we had a brawl with 70 kids because we're bringing them all from different neighborhoods, and they all had conflicts with one another because they were from different neighborhoods. And the church members, there was no infrastructure. So I think managing the behavior has, if you want to be able to mentor well, part of that has to do with, especially with large groups, the infrastructure. Now, if you're talking one-on-one mentorship, it has everything to do with the relationship. So, like at Youth for Christ, they talk about a relational ministry action of building times. So, if you want to mentor someone, they have to buy into you. So that's talking about the home visits. That's talking about going out to McDonald's without trying to teach them something. So that's the onboarding with one-on-one. Now with group mentorship, where you're discipling a group of people, the infrastructure plays in. So that's behavior contracts, like making sure that you engage parents. I think one of the big things that, uh, especially urban youth mentorship, people can be intimidated by the parents, and they can kind of like shy away from engaging those parents, or they have low expectations for the parents. And I think when you're mentoring a youth, there also has to be a dual mentorship with the adult that's in their life as well. And so that's a part of it. So like when we onboard the people into our first level of discipleship, we do an orientation process. We go into their home. We talk to them about the program. We talk to the parent about the program. We pray over the parent, pray over their home. And so we really establish that authority structure that, hey, it's not just Dom that's telling you, hey, we need to do X, Y, and Z, but it's also your parent, and it's also empowering the parent. So the discipleship and the mentorship doesn't just end at when he or she hangs out with Dom. See what I'm saying? There's an extension of that when they go home. And so that's key, keeping that communication. And then establishing clear rules. Like that's a big one as well. It's like every single week we're doing this. These are the expectations, because one of the things you'll see when you get a bunch of kids in is they always forget the expectations. But when you set them each time and you incentivize them, right? So like candy, gift cards, $5 gift cards, incentivizing those expectations so they remember them. Because I think a lot of times we can start like coming at kids when really it's just the chaos of the room that they're in, that they're not remembering the rules. So just because you say it once doesn't mean they're going to remember it, because when they're all together, right, and they're coming from an environment where somebody died, or last night there was 70 shots rang out in their neighborhood, and they're coming to an environment, you have to set the environment each week so they know what to expect, because everything in their life is all over the place. So if you don't set the traditions of what you want your group to be, then they're going to take control of that group if they feel like there's no control from the adults. So back to what you said, how do you handle an individual kid? It has to do with the teamwork of the mentors that are together and the infrastructure you've created, the expectations you've created. And that's a lot of work, because like for us, we're going in and out of hotels. Like in our program, every 5 months, we have kids losing their houses, going in and out of hotels, going in and out of shelters. And so like for us, it's like real missions work. So I'm not saying that type of infrastructure is an easy thing. It's a hard thing. It's something where you have to count the cost. We're going to go the extra mile. We're going to go, sit in the shelter and do the orientation with the parent who's might be drunk, whatever's going on, right? And do that. And so that's a big part of it. Now, the second part about what happens when you do all the infrastructure and then the conflict breaks out. So a big part of that is separating the student from their audience. So separating the student from their audience. So as long as the student, if they're acting out and they're in front of their peers and their peers are egging them on, like in a youth group environment or a 10 to 20 group, youth mentorship, you have to immediately remove that person from the group. And you have to be in teamwork with your leaders to be able to take over. And that's where every leader needs to understand urban classroom management. Like, for example, okay, fingers up to the sky. All right, what does this mean? What does fingers up to the sky mean? And you have your candy bag there and you're rewarding them because really mentorship is like you're raising them up. And a lot of times they don't have that because when we're just picking them up straight from the neighborhood, they're running wild everywhere. See what I'm saying? And we're having to train them to be able to be leaders, to know what it means to exist within an organized environment. So removing the audience, separating the kid, and being able to ask good questions. That's the key, not becoming angry with the kid. That's why you have to do the home visits, you have to know the kid, you have to identify with the kid. You have to find, common ground with the kid that you're mentoring. And so from there, it's reinforcing your intentions as well. So, like, when you're actually in the conflict and you're trying to de-escalate it, it's, "Hey, buddy, I'm here because I care about you. Hey, here's a little bit about my story." Right? This is why I'm not willing to see you continue this dysfunctional behavior, because this is where this dysfunctional behavior is going to leave you. And I care about you too much to allow you to continue to do this. So it's not feeling bad for a kid and saying, "Oh man, what's your story? Oh, poor you, man. You're never going to be able to do it." Right? It's combining the compassion with saying, "Okay, this is what we're going to do next. And this is why we're doing it. And this is what I'm doing with you." So it's more of a coaching relationship. I think a lot of mentorship is coaching. If you imagine like a football coach, a basketball coach, it's like, and I don't think that sometimes people look at it that way, but if they look at it more that way, it's like, hey, this is it's acknowledging what they did wrong and saying, hey, this is the intention of why I'm pointing it out. So I don't know if there's a lot to teach on that, like how to deal with the conflict when it's happening, how to deal with fights when fights break out. That's a big one as well. A lot of it has to do with having your other leaders, they have to be activated, and you have to know what you're walking into. Like, big mistake I made was like, "Okay, we're doing campus life. We need 100 people in the room." Right? Youth for Christ. But when I do mentorship, it's like, it's better that we take them in phases and teach them how to have a strong organization. It doesn't matter how good of a mentor you are, if you don't have strong organization to what you're trying to do, it will fall. You won't get to the mentorship,
Right.
which is like the one-on-one with the kid.
Mm. Man, I was a teacher for like a decade at kind of a tougher school up in Dallas, and I would always say like I would always say a couple things. One, the kid doesn't care what you know till they know that you care.
Yeah.
And two, you can be the best teacher in the entire world, but if you can't control your classroom, it's all for naught because they ain't gonna listen to a thing you say. But man, like, you know, oftentimes kids would come in and there'd be a fight, and hey, hey, bro, you got to go out in the hall, and like a couple things that I found when you're removing them from the situation, I absolutely love what you said about being a coach. Are you acting as a coach or are you acting as a warden? You know?
Yeah.
And so you send them outside and you can very easily go outside and be like, what are you doing? Don't you know? Da, 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 da," right. And that never goes well because then it is you versus them and they've got their guard up and they're fighting. If you can come in curious and you come in and you've got to know your facial expressions and "Hey, man, dude, what happened in there, man? Like, oh my gosh, like I am so worried about you. Like, why don't why don't you tell me about what happened? Oh, well, and they're going off and you are mature enough because you're the adult to absorb his emotion. So they can
Yeah.
go off and this isn't time to teach, this isn't time to correct, it's time to listen and let them get that off their chest. And then you can, oh man, I am so sorry. Like, why don't we talk about that? Why don't you tell me what you could have done instead of this, that, that, and so, but man, like it is so important that you get to calm them down. You get to bring peace to the chaos. But kind of like what you said earlier, you can't do any of those things if you're not filled with peace yourself. If,
Yeah.
you know, you don't have compassion, if you don't have patience, if you don't have joy, like that's why it's so important for us to be filled up. That's why it's so important for us to have our own relationship with Christ because we can't give what, you can't give what you don't have. So, uh, but yeah, man. So Thanks a lot for sharing all of that stuff, for sure. All right, Dominic, man, I got one more question for you today. If someone was coming to you and they were saying, "Hey, Dom, man, I heard that you mentor. I've been thinking about doing it. What's what are the most important things that I need to know if I'm going to start mentoring a kid?" Tell me how you'd answer that.
So for an individual who wants to mentor, the first thing that you do is like what I talked about. Come and see the story, like understand what's going on in the community. So that's the first thing, getting a strong grasp on that. And I think even part of that is gained through being a part of a team, right? So like a team of mentors, because like when we're eating lunch or we're in between doing ministry or doing mentorship, we have conversations, right? And a lot of like stuff was like, hey, this is going on in the neighborhood, or this is what happened to this kid, or or this is what's happened, or sharing stories that kind of gives them like, oh, okay, this is what's going on in the community. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing would be specific trainings. Um, so like understanding the behaviors, so where they come from. So like trauma training, ADHD training, like how those behaviors manifest in the classroom, and then giving tangible strategies on how to remedy those things. Um, but in terms of like somebody wanting to mentor, the first thing is they gotta have the compassion. They gotta have the heart to do it. And I truly believe that is like, especially for the context, everyone's called the disciple, right? Because the Bible says, make disciples of all nations. But in my context, you're dealing with like people are passing away and stuff like that. Like, people are there's violence going on in the community. And so it's just really counting the cost is like, hey, when I'm joining in with this, I'm dealing with some kids that are really coming from some serious stuff. Like they're in and out of shelters, it's like, and really being committed. Um, and that's key. So I don't know if that answers the question, but the first thing is like understand what's going on in the community. First is through going to the community. If you can't go to the community, then then you're only going to get so far
Right.
in your effectiveness. So
It's awesome, Dom. Man, well, thank you so much for hopping on the pod today. Tell me how people can find out more about you and about Urban Story.
yeah, so they can go to our website at urbanstoryministries.com, or they can go to our Instagram, Facebook at Urban Story Ministries. Um, and then my email is Dominick at urbanstoryministries.com, and they can reach out.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's Dominick at urbanstoriesministries.com. So, Donnie, man, thanks again for your wisdom. Thanks again for sharing your story and for just taking time to help us become mentors who look more like Jesus today, man. Really grateful for you. So,
Amen. Thank you for having me.
of course. Yeah. So, thanks so much for tuning in. If you picked up something from this podcast, please be sure to share it with a friend. And remember, you can mentor.